Medieval Chronicles presents, it begins with a road, not a straight one, not even a single one, but a web, a vast, living network that stretched across mountains, deserts, kingdoms, and centuries. A road made not of stones, but of footsteps, not of walls, but of stories. This is the Silk Road, and in the Middle Ages, it was the beating heart of a world far more interconnected than we imagine. A world where merchants, monks, warriors, scholars, nomads, and dreamers crossed paths and unknowingly shaped the future of civilizations. Today, we walk that road again, step by step, land by land, culture by culture, to uncover how one route connected medieval worlds, cultures, and in países. The Middle Ages are often imagined as fragmented, isolated kingdoms, distant peoples and civilizations unaware of one another. But from the 6th to the 14th century, the Silk Road turned this assumption upside down. Picture a world map, not the one we know today, but a medieval vision filled with blank spaces and imagined lands. What looks like empty distance is in fact a corridor of movement. From the Mediterranean Sea to the Pacific Ocean, caravans creaked forward, driven not only by trade but by hope, curiosity, and ambition. A Chinese emperor sought horses so powerful they were said to sweat blood. A Persian merchant carried spices from India, each more valuable than gold. Arab sailors navigated by the stars, guiding ships filled with silks and gemstones. And European travelers, rare but real, followed rumors of distant kingdoms and legendary riches. The Silk Road was more than commerce. It was the medieval internet transmitting ideas, technologies, religions, and innovations across continents. Slowly but surely, it was stitching the world together. Our journey begins where many journeys ended, the Taklamakan desert, the desert of no return. Imagine waves, not of water, but sand. Golden dunes rising like mountains, collapsing with each gust of wind. A place so vast that footsteps disappear in minutes, so silent that even hope seems to echo. Yet caravans crossed it. At dawn, long shadows stretched from camels loaded with bolts of silk, sacks of jade, and precious scrolls wrapped in leather. Guides listened to the desert as if it were alive, predicting storms, reading the patterns of the wind, following ancient markers buried in shifting dunes. It was here that the courage of the Silk Road truly began. For those who crossed the Taklamakan understood a harsh truth. Only through the desert can one reach the kingdoms beyond. And beyond it lay the Oasis sanctuaries of life, where cultures bloomed in the middle of nothingness. The medieval city-states of Khotan Kazgar and Dunhuang were jewels of survival. At night, the glow of lanterns flickered across painted walls of Buddhist caves. Monks translated scrolls brought from India. Muslim merchants prayed in early mosques. Chinese artisans shaped jade into symbols of power, and nomadic warriors watched the horizon, guarding or threatening the lifelines of caravans. Each oasis was a crossroads. Each market was a language lesson. Each caravanserai, a melting pot of beliefs and customs. A merchant from Samarkand might trade with a monk from Shangan. A Jewish travula might buy spices from an Indian sailor. A Turkic warrior might learn healing herbs from a Chinese physician. In these desert cities, the world began to blend slowly, beautifully, and If the Silk Road had a crown, it was by the Middle Ages. It was the pride of Sogdia, a culture of merchants who were, in many ways, the true architects of the Silk Road. Their caravans traveled farther than any others. Their language became the lingua franca of trade. Their skill in negotiation was legendary. Imagine entering medieval Samarkand. The air is thick with the scent of saffron and incense. Silks shimmer in the sun, each bolt more vivid than the last. Musicians play lutes and flutes as storytellers recount tales of heroes in distant lands. Goldsmiths hammer ornaments so delicate they seem woven from sunlight. Here, ideas moved as freely as goods. Astronomers charted the heavens. Doctors studied herbs brought from China. Poets mixed Persian and Turkic verses. And Sogdian merchants carried religions, Buddhism, Manichaeism, Nestorian Christianity, across hundreds of miles. Samarkand was not just a city. It was a conversation, one that resonated across the medieval world. If goods were the body of the Silk Road, beliefs were its soul. Buddhist monks walked westward, carrying scriptures and stories. Christian missionaries traveled eastward, carving crosses in remote valleys. Islamic scholars journeyed across Central Asia, establishing mosques and schools in booming trade cities. Religions did not simply pass each other like travelers in the night. They met, they debated, they learned. This was the medieval crossroads of faith, a rare place where diversity was not just tolerated but integrated. In Bamiyan, giant statues of the Buddha towered over travelers. In Turfan, Christian churches stood beside Buddhist temples. In Kashgar, the call to prayer echoed across the market at sunrise. The Silk Road created a religious mosaic unlike anywhere else on earth. And this was only the beginning of its influence. The roots of silk and the goods that shaped world silk, the fabric that gave its name to the road. But the Silk Road carried so much more than silk. Picture a single caravan entering a medieval marketplace. What you would see on the camels' backs was the essence of continents. Chinese silks, softest water, strongest myth, Persian carpets. So fine, they seemed impossible to weave by human hands. Indian spices, cinnamon and cloves that transformed kitchens and medicines. Arab glass, translucent, fragile, and precious African ivory, carved into symbols of royalty. Byzantine jewelry, glowing with imperial splendor. Turkic horses, fast as arrows, and valued beyond gold. And beyond these luxuries, there were practical wonders. Steel, paper, medicines, dyes, inks, and agricultural secrets that would reshape entire societies. But the most influential item to travel along the Silk Road was something weightless. Ideas. They were the invisible cargo, the true power of the road. China's gifts to the medieval world. When the medieval world looked east, it found more than silk. Paper, the revolutionary invention. It is hard to imagine the world before paper, before books, before records, before widespread writing. But paper was born in China, and its journey westward would eventually ignite revolutions. Across the Silk Road, Chinese artisans taught others how to mash pulp, dry, and press plant fibers into thin, miraculous sheets. By the 8th century, paper mills appeared in Samarkand, then Baghdad, then the Mediterranean. Without paper, medieval knowledge would have remained locked behind stone tablets, fragile parchment, or expensive vellum. With it, the world became ripe. Gunpowder, the accidental gift gunpowder, began as a Chinese alchemical experiment, a search for immortality that produced explosions instead. But once the secret reached the Islamic world and then Europe, warfare changed forever. Silk, the thread that united empires for centuries. China guarded the secret of silk as fiercely as any empire has guarded any treasure. Smuggling silkworms was punishable by death. Yet eventually, knowledge leaks, and the Silk Road became the artery that carried this shimmering fabric to the west, shaping fashion, trade, and diplomacy. Travel westward with me now, toward the centers of the Islamic Golden Age, where knowledge became a treasure even more valued than gold. Baghdad, Damascus, Cordoba, these were cities where scholars from every faith worked side by side, translating ancient Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic. Here's what the Silk Road brought into Muslim hands: mathematics from India, medicine from Greece, astronomy from Persia, paper from China, trade wealth from everywhere, and the result, a burst of innovation unlike anything the medieval world had seen. Doctors wrote medical encyclopedias that would later reach Europe. Astronomers mapped the skies with precision. Philosophers debated Aristotle. Engineers designed marvels of water, gears, and architecture. Caravans did not just carry goods, they carried wisdom. And this wisdom, carried westward, would eventually spark new ideas in medieval Europe. No journey along the Silk Road is complete without crossing the vast grasslands of the Eurasian steppe, the homeland of nomadic empires. This is the domain of Scythians, Huns, Turks, and eventually the Mongols. Here, the wind is the only constant companion, sweeping across endless grasses. And in this land, horses were everything: transportation, status, warfare, wealth. Nomadic tribes were feared and respected for one reason: they could move faster, strike sooner, and vanish more completely than any settled army. But what is less known is this: nomads were essential to the Silk Road survival. They were the protectors of caravans, guides through dangerous terrain, partners and trade diplomats between distant cultures. When nomadic confederations were strong, trade thrived. When they fractured, the Silk Road trembled, and then came the greatest nomadic empire of all time. The Mediterranean connection, Europe awakens as the Silk Road carried wonders westward. Medieval Europe, often perceived as isolated, awakened to a world of possibilities. Silk changed fashion in royal courts. Spices revolutionized cuisine and medicine. Paper enabled the rise of universities, record-keeping, and eventually the printing press. Gunpowder rewrote the rules of warfare, and stories of distant lands filled the imaginations of scholars and explorers. The medieval world, once fragmented, was becoming a network, slowly, quietly, but inevitably. The Silk Road acted like a river whose waters reached far beyond its visible banks, fertilizing fields of thought, art, science, and identity. But not everything that traveled along the Silk Road brought prosperity. In the 14th century, the most devastating passenger moved across the caravans, hitching a ride on fleas, rodents, cargo, and ship holds. The Black Death. It began far from Europe, likely somewhere in Central Asia, and spread across the trade routes with indifferent speed. The same network that had carried spices and silk now carried silence. The silence of empty homes, abandoned villages, and broken families. By the time the plague reached Europe, it reshaped society, economy, religion, and culture. Labor shortages empowered peasants. Old structures collapsed. New ideas emerged. The Silk Road was a lifeline, but all lifelines carry risks. It connected civilizations not only in triumph, but in tragedy. This was the shadow side of connection. Despite calamities, the Silk Road remained a vibrant channel for intellectual exchange. A doctor in Persia might learn techniques from India and pass them to a scholar in Cairo, a mathematician in Baghdad. Studying Indian numerals would lay the foundations for algebra. A monastic librarian in Europe would copy texts translated from Arabic, themselves translations of Greek originals. Ideas passed from hand to hand like torches, each generation lighting the next. It is here that we see the Silk Road as its true nature, not a road of goods, but a road of minds. No road lasts forever. By the 15th century, several forces converged to dim the Silk Road's glow. The rise of maritime trade. European kingdoms, driven by the very curiosities sparked by the Silk Road, sought faster, cheaper, safer ways to reach Asia. Ships replaced camels, sails replaced dunes, ports replaced oases. Political fragmentation. The Mongol Empire fractured into smaller khanates. Security vanished. Costs increased. Caravans faced danger once more. New powers, new borders. The Ottomans rose. The Ming dynasty withdrew inward. Central Asian kingdoms fought among themselves. The Silk Road didn't end suddenly. It faded, quietly, gradually, like an ancient melody slipping from memory. But its legacy never disappeared. If we follow the threads of influence woven by the Silk Road, we find they stretch into modern life. Paper became the foundation of education, administration, printing, and literature. Gunpowder reshaped global history. Silk influenced fashion and diplomacy for centuries. Mathematical knowledge from the Islamic world built the foundations of modern science. Spices changed economies and sparked the age of exploration. Religious and philosophical exchanges enriched cultures on every side of Eurasia. Disease transmission reshaped demographics and social structures. Artistic styles, from Chinese motifs to Persian miniatures, blended into new forms. The Silk Road was never just a route. It was a bridge, a dialogue, a tapestry across deserts, mountains, seas, and centuries. It connected medieval worlds and created pathways that we still follow today. Empires rise and fall. Maps change. Borders shift. But the spirit of the Silk Road lived and still lives in its people. The anonymous merchant who braved the desert winds, the monk who carried scriptures across mountains, the scholar who translated knowledge into another tongue, the nomadic guide who followed the stars, the young traveler who dreamed of lands beyond the horizon. They were the threads. They were the weavers. They were the Silk Road. Each step they took, each exchange they made, brought the world a little closer together. Today, the Silk Road is quiet. Caravans no longer line the horizons. Oasis kingdoms lie in ruins. Empires exist only in stories carved in stone, but if you walk through the bazaars of Samarkand, the temples of Dunhuang, or the alleyways of Kash, you can still feel it. A whisper of traders bargaining, the echo of hooves in ancient dust, the shimmer of silk catching the morning sun, the scent of spices carried by a distant breeze. The Silk Road is not gone. It has simply transformed into global trade, international exchange, digital communication, and cultural dialogue. The world today is connected because once, long ago, a web of roads taught humanity that connection is possible. So let us look back one last time across the dunes of the across the blue domes of across the bustling ports of the Mediterranean, across mountains, deserts, cities, and centuries. One road connected medieval worlds, cultures, and empires. But more importantly, one road taught us how connection can shape destiny. The Silk Road was not merely a path, it was a promise that knowledge travels, that cultures blend, that humanity, even in its most distant corners, seeks one another. The medieval world may have ended, but the Silk Road, its spirit, never did. It lives each time we share, discover, trade, learn, or dream. This is the legacy of the Silk Road. And it continues wherever human beings choose to connect